Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session today. It's always a great honor to be able to share customer stories, and today you're going to hear a really great one. My name's Mike Bainbridge. I run innovation programs at AWS. It's my team's job to help our customers innovate like Amazon by starting with the customer problem and working backwards. Today, you're going to hear about how Manchester Airports Group, MAG, are helping to change and transform passenger experience at the airports using generative AI. But what makes this story really interesting is the approach they took, the speed that they delivered it, and the impact that it's already having. So let's take a look about what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start in a moment with an introduction to innovation, why it's so important, what the main challenges are, and how you can be successful. Then I'll hand it over to the MAG team to talk about their organization and the passenger and customer challenge that they're addressing, along with the digital experience that they have delivered. You'll then hear from the AWS prototyping team to talk about how the solution was built. And then finally, you'll get to see how the virtual airport liaison, or VAL, was put into production. We'll wrap things up with some lessons learned and how you can learn from this story to go on your own innovation journey. And then if we have time at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience. So let me introduce the rest of the speakers I have with me today. I'm delighted to introduce John Fowler, the Chief Operating Officer from London Stansted, and Ryan Kant, the Chief Digital Officer from MAG, as well as Val Cohen from the AWS prototyping team. Before I hand over to them, I'm going to start with an introduction on why innovation is so important. And I'm going to ask you to cast your minds back to about 2016, when digital transformation first became this important business topic that everyone was talking about. So transformation goes through three phases. The first phase for an organization is making things digital. And you'll know what this is like. It's building the website, it's building the mobile apps, it's putting sensors and IoT devices. The first phase of transformation are those IT projects. The second phase of transformation came about 3 or 4 years later as organizations started to realize that with these digital estates, they could then track data points from everything. This was the era of big data. And big data meant that we could make smarter business decisions based on numbers rather than just on hunches and experience. Now we're in the third phase of transformation. And that's innovation, changing the way things have worked, using the data that we have from our digital estates to drive efficiency and new customer value within our organizations. And the reason you hear innovation used so much, it's become key strategic milestones for many organizations. I don't think there's a CEO presentation I don't hear that mentions innovation now. It's the current business topic that's driving a lot of change. But innovation is really hard. It's a real challenge, and there are a number of reasons for this. The first is it means change. And we're creatures of habit. Humans don't like change, so initially that becomes a challenge for us. The second challenge is around the word experimentation. Whether you know it or not, you think about experiments in the wrong way. The first experiments you did were at school, in the science lab. But guess what? They weren't experiments. They were demonstrations. The teacher knew what was going to happen, or you were following the recipe so you could learn about science. So whether you realize or not, you think experiments are always successful. But actually, when you're trying to do something new and you don't know what the outcome is, a lot of the time, you're going to fail, or you won't get the result you expect. And that's the third challenge, the word fail. Failure is bad. We punish failure. So if you're going to start an innovation program, you have to learn to embrace failure as part of that journey. And that's what makes it really complex and difficult. The innovation programs team at AWS has worked with over 600 customers in the last 7 years. And there are 3 things that we see successful customers do as they embark on this transformation. The first is to select the right business stakeholder to promote the program. And this is really important because often when you're going, experimenting, trying to do new things, trying to embrace failure, you need someone senior within the organization to be able to back you, to be there as an escalation point and to help things work cross-functionally across teams. Secondly, you should focus on a problem and not a project, because you know what it's like. When you're doing a project, you know what outcome you want to drive. So for example, if you want to understand more about your customers, building a CRM is a project. It's not an innovation program. What you should think of as you're innovating is actually, how can I get to understand my customers in a different way? And that opens up way more solutions to you. The third thing is defining the business value of a potential solution before you start. Now, this is really important because when you do all the great experimenting and prototyping and then you want to launch into production, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to make an investment in some resources. And if you haven't thought about that upfront and you haven't defined the value to the organization, that can become a real sticking point that slows everything down just when you're excited and want to launch your product. But if these are the challenges, what are the benefits of doing this? As you go through innovation engagements and experimentation, innovation doesn't just become a program or a project, something you do. It becomes part of your culture then, and it becomes a behavior. This means it's easier for you to embrace failure as part of the journey, and it's easier for your teams to take risks. Secondly, it gives new opportunities to those teams who are working on the projects to understand new technology and develop new skills. And finally, it helps you give a fresh focus on customer outcomes, deeply understanding your customers, understanding what their key challenges are, and then delivering real value to solve their problems. So that's a short introduction to what we talk about when we talk about innovation. I'm now going to pass over to John to give an introduction to MAG.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Fowler, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at London Stansted. I'm just going to take a few moments to introduce you to MAG, to London Stansted, and to the problem which we were trying to solve. So, Manchester Airport Group is the UK's largest airport operator. The group comprises of 3 airports and a digital travel marketplace, Cavu. The airports are Manchester in the north, East Midlands in the centre, and London Stansted in the south. Collectively, they serve up to 65 million passengers to 261 destinations. We provide employment for 38,000 people and contribute 8 billion to the UK economy. So we exist to connect our customers to the world with great airport experiences and innovative travel solutions. Our missions are to make our airport services the #1 choice for passengers and airlines. And whilst part of a group, each airport is unique in its offering. Manchester is proud to connect the north. East Midlands fulfills a dual role as a regional airport as well as the largest pure freight airport in the UK. And at London Stansted, we have more possibilities, differentiating with simplicity, value, and choice. Stansted is Europe's busiest single-terminal, single-runway airport. It's the 3rd largest London airport with around 30 million passengers annually and 100,000 passengers a day at peak. We're positioned between the capital and the university town of Cambridge in the east of England. This is known as the UK Innovation Corridor. The only major London airport to have capacity and government permission to grow, we're about to embark on a £1.1 billion investment programme to extend our terminal and handling capacity to 43 million passengers. And as we grow by roughly 30%, we will offer more choice through destinations to Europe and beyond, more value through competitive airfares and services, and ease. The simplicity not just being from public transport, we do have a railway station underneath the airport, but also for airlines with less than 5 minutes from runway to gate. So an airport is like a mini city. MAG employ about 2,500 colleagues at Stansted, but in total about 13,000 people work across the site. We have a dedicated police force. We have our own fire and rescue service. Aircraft parts are manufactured on site, and we even have our own college providing the talent of the future, a unique asset for a UK airport. Passenger, baggage and aircraft flows come together to maintain safety and compliance, and whilst ensuring our passengers can arrive and depart with ease. And further value is added and created through transport links, food and beverage options and retail. And all of this is underpinned by a whole suite of innovative technology procured or developed in partnership with some of the world's leading tech specialists. But approximately 50% of our passengers originate from outside of the UK. And with 200 destinations to 39 different countries and onward connectivity through Dubai and Istanbul, it's easy to see how our customers can speak upwards of 40 languages. Our customers book directly with airlines or with travel agencies, but most only become known to us when they book one of our services, like parking, lounge access, security fast track. I'd like to know our customers better in advance, which will allow us to better serve and inform them so they can relax and enjoy the airport, and also know of our commercial offers available to them. But given the origins of our passengers, we get bookings from less than 40% of people through the airport, which means we know less than 40% of people. And as I mentioned, we're Europe's busiest single terminal, processing 5,250 departing passengers on a busy hour. So that means on a busy hour, I've got approximately 3,500 people coming through the terminal, speaking upwards of 40 different languages, all with different needs, concerns, and questions. We're a lean, value-driven airport with just 2 customer service desks. So how do I get to know those customers, answer their questions, provide a great service, and get maximum value out of their custom? And that's the question I asked to our Chief Digital Officer, Ryan Camp.
Thanks, John. The right button, I was holding. So when John called with that question, my mind immediately went back to standing in a room similar to this 12 months ago at reInvent 2023, when AWS launched Amazon Bedrock, the generative AI capability that many of you in the room will now be familiar with. And I had to believe that that capability was part of the answer to solving the question that John had posed. Our hypothesis was that we could use a natural language model to start to interact with customers' questions in a human-feeling way and in languages that they spoke, in a way that we couldn't serve with our customer service agent just alone. The challenge to my team was, can we move quickly to prototype something using Amazon Bedrock? Can we do it on top of a digital customer platform that actually would serve as the starting point, as the gateway for customers to interact with us and get to know us? And my challenge to the team was, can we work with the AWS prototyping team to deliver this capability quickly? And I wanted to be the first airport in the UK to do so. So with that challenge, I turned it over to the prototyping team, and Val's going to take you through the process of prototyping, how the team worked through that, what some of the outcomes were, and then I'm going to talk about what that's looked like in production for us. Thanks, Val.
Awesome. So before I go into all the awesome details about how we actually built the prototype, what it looks like, the architecture, I want to first touch on the why, the what, and the how behind prototyping with AWS. There's 3 main reasons that customers want to do prototypes: expedite, experiment, and experience. Customers want to accelerate their path to production and get started quickly to show business value. They also want to experiment in a low-risk environment where they can prove out hypotheses and fail fast. And lastly, they want to experience new technologies by getting hands-on development and also Amazonian mechanisms like working backwards. So what is a prototype? It's somewhere between a demo and production. It's a pretty big scale, so let's break that down a little bit. A demo is something that you probably build in a couple of hours that really shows functionality for one use case. Production, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, is a full-scale application that fits all use cases. A prototype is somewhere in between. It's a full-stack application, but it's specifically designed to only fit a subset of use cases. That allows us to move really quickly, experiment, do all the things that I talked about before, without having to worry about that whole production-grade system. The way we build prototypes is through a 5-step process. The first step is discovery, really understanding what is the customer's problem so that we can focus on the problem, not the project. We talk to the customer and understand some challenges they're going through, and then once we've identified a use case that we think prototyping is a good fit for, we'll go into a workshop. During the workshop, we dive deep on that use case. We really understand what are the current processes and challenges behind it. Then we go into the planning phase. So one really great thing about prototyping that I haven't even shared so far is that it's an investment program by AWS. What does that mean? It means that unlike traditional professional services, you're not paying for the time of the folks from AWS. We're there to help you. We're there to help you innovate. And you're not paying for our time. So it's really an investment by AWS to help you all innovate and to help you all experiment and adopt some of these Amazonian mechanisms. So the planning phase does not consist of a traditional project planning. We don't have a formal statement of work or things like that. Instead, what we have is something called a scope document. In that scope document, we, as the prototyping team, along with the customer, outline what criteria we think are required in order for the prototype to be considered successful. We call them success criteria. Really great name. We also outline some stretch goals that if we have a little extra time, we can make sure we accomplish. The last thing we do is talk about what's out of scope. We want to make sure we're not towing the line of going into that kind of production scale system. Once we agree upon that with the customer, which often takes some back and forth, this is a living document that we work with the customer to create, we then go into the build phase. For me, the build phase is the fun part. It's where I get hands-on with technology, often working with engineers or data scientists or even business folks from the customer side to create this solution. We fail, we experiment, all the things that Mike talked about as part of the innovation process. After the build, we enable the customer on their path to production. The account team continues to support the customer, and the prototyping team delivers a prototyping report. Again, we're really original with our names over here. The prototyping report consists of a couple different aspects. The first is information about what we've built, describing the different components, as well as some information about decisions we made, why we made them, and alternatives in case they don't work the way they're expected to in production. We know we're working in an isolated environment, and production environments don't always look the same. So we outline a couple paths forward for things that we think are really critical. The report also contains recommendations for industrialization, often in areas like security, infrastructure, and data science for AI projects, which over the last year, a lot of them have been. Let me talk you through the workshop a little bit more detail. So there's a couple of focus areas that we want to make sure we address during the workshops that we have with customers. The first, like I mentioned, is really understanding the current process, having them walk us through that, showing us their data, seeing how people do the process today. We also want to make sure we understand the challenges with the current process, what's not working. And lastly, we work hard to identify any non-obvious constraints. What are things we might not notice if we don't look really closely that could make a big impact on taking the prototype to production? I'm going to talk you through the workshop that we had with MAG, starting with the current process and challenges that they described earlier. So, how many of you had a layover on your way to Las Vegas? Okay, I'm seeing a couple hands. How many of you had 2 layovers? Right, just them. All right, great. Unfortunate for them, but I'm going to tell you about my layover experience on the way here that illustrates some of the challenges that we've probably all faced when traveling through airports and trying to get help and assistance. When I landed, I was coming from the UK and had to go through customs. I had to uncheck my bag. I had to then recheck my bag, re-go through security. It was really confusing, but I also had to go from one terminal to another. There wasn't great signage. I had no idea where I was going. I was pretty jet lagged, so I tried really hard to find an assistance counter. When I eventually did, there was a pretty long line, and so I thought maybe I can use Google Maps or I can use the airport's website to find information. Unfortunately for me, my phone wasn't quite cooperating, so I couldn't get data, and I couldn't get onto the Wi-Fi because it required a phone number to access it, which I didn't have access to, so I was really struggling to use my phone at all. I was constantly keeping an eye on the flight boards to see if my flight was on time, or ideally, a little bit delayed to give me a little extra breathing room. I wound up being okay. I got some help from some folks and was able to get to the right terminal, was able to get to my flight on time, and even had time to grab a coffee, which was much needed by that point. A lot of you probably identify with this experiences. I've seen some nods in the audience. I know traveling can be really stressful. But there's a couple of things that were not obvious, to me at least, when thinking about this process that we worked with MAG to uncover during the workshop. The first of those is that customers are from all over the world, especially at Stansted Airport. It's a really international airport, and so we needed this solution to support those customers. So our solution had to have multi-language support, and that really influenced some of the LLMs that we looked at, some of the large language models. We also knew customers wanted answers quickly. If you're rushing from one flight to another during a tight connection, you don't want to wait 3 minutes for a kiosk to answer your question. So that meant we needed the system to have pretty low latency. We wanted to make sure customers could get answers quickly. We also knew customers wanted to ask about a variety of things, whether that was information about the airport that Ryan talked about earlier, or just information about their next flight, etc. That meant we were going to need to use LLM agents to be able to intelligently decide how to answer customers' questions. Lastly, we wanted to make sure the chatbot focused on MAG-related queries. I don't know about you all, but I often use LLMs to help me with recipes or figure things out. We didn't want this kiosk to do that. We wanted it to help customers with their airport experience. Now that we had identified all the constraints, maybe not all, but a lot, and we had gone through some of the initial workshop activities, it was time to start whiteboarding a diagram. We knew at a high level we wanted to build an interactive conversational chatbot to answer questions. We also knew that these questions could be about the airport, the weather, or flights to start with. Lastly, we knew that the system needed access to chat history so that people could ask follow-up questions, as well as MAG website data so that people could get relevant information about their airport. So we drew this beautiful, not so great handwritten diagram, and this is an actual photo from the workshop that we did with MAG. You can feel free to take photos if you want, but I did make it easier for you and put it into some nice architecture diagrams that I will talk you through on this slide. My handwriting is pretty atrocious, so I hope this is easier to read. One of the things that we did as we went into the planning phase is started to add a little bit of security around the solution. For example, in the architecture diagram here, we added Amazon CloudFront as well as AWS WAF, Amazon Cognito, and AWS IAM as well, though they're not shown on the diagram here. That way, we were authenticated and authorized to access the Amazon API gateway, which in turn triggered an AWS Lambda function. It's starting to look a lot like that diagram above, and it will continue to do so because that Lambda function accesses chat history in Amazon DynamoDB. We decided to use Amazon Kendra as our vector database and stored all of the MAG website data in its original HTML form in Amazon S3 buckets. We used LLMs on Amazon Bedrock to orchestrate this process and to really make the intelligent decisions that LLMs do. Let's take a closer look at the business logic inside the Lambda function once everyone finishes taking photos. Awesome. All right, so if we look again at that zoomed in part of the initial architecture diagram, don't worry, I've drawn it out for you. I'm going to give you a couple examples to talk this through for those a little less familiar with how this process works. If any of you were looking at the slide earlier, you might have seen 2 champagne glasses clinking. Anyone else notice that? It's a little early for that. So the question under that customers ask sometimes is there a lounge in the airport? If I ask the system that question, the way the system should handle that is using a technique called RAG. Has anyone here heard of RAG before? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Awesome. It stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and I often get that wrong, and I'm hoping I didn't today. What RAG does is it does 3 things. The first is the retrieval. It does a semantic search to find relevant content from your data source, in this case, the MAG website. So we might pull a couple paragraphs about different lounges within whichever airport we're searching. Then it passes the paragraphs from the website as well as the original question to the LLM. Now the LLM has all the information it needs to generate a response, which is the G part of RAG. We did all of this using LLMs in Amazon Bedrock. What if I ask a little bit of a trickier question? What if I ask, what's the weather like at the destination of flight VS007? Well, there's 2 things the system needs. It's definitely going to need to know about that flight information, and it's also somehow going to need to access weather. Neither of those are stored in the website data. The flight information changes all the time, as you can all see from the boards and airports and things like that. And I can't imagine the MAG website data would have weather about every city in real time. So we needed a different way to access that information. And that's where tools come in. We use LangChain to orchestrate our process. And so we created tools that allowed us to access the flight information via an API and use an open source tool for the weather. We then used an agent to intelligently decide which of these tools to use. So with the question I asked before, the first thing the agent that's powered by an LLM on Amazon Bedrock will do is it will say, what tools do I have available to answer this question? Now, we as engineers have provided descriptions for these tools. So we told the system that API call to get flight information should be used to get flight information like destinations or status. We also told it that the weather tool should be used to get the weather data for a city in real time. So the agent sees those descriptions and realizes first it needs to know the destination of flight VS007, uses that custom tool to get information about that, and finds out that the destination of flight VS007 is Las Vegas, Nevada. Then it understands that that's not enough information to answer the user's question. It doesn't actually tell them anything about the weather. So again, it looks at its tools, sees what it has available, realizes it has a weather tool, uses the weather tool to get the current weather about Las Vegas, Nevada, which is 20 degrees Celsius or about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That was an optimistic prediction that I made when I went through this presentation, so I'm a little off. Don't be mad at me when you go outside and it's a little colder than that. So now the agent has the information it needs to answer the customer's question, and it can tell the customer that the weather at the destination of flight VS007, which is Las Vegas, Nevada, is 20 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If we add the RAG tool in, you have a pretty good picture of all the tools that the agent had available for it. Now that we had a really good sense of the architecture, we could outline the scope. Oh. Find me later. I'll get you pictures. Awesome. And so we could actually outline the scope. So we knew from the top-level architecture diagram we needed 2 key things. The first was that we needed to build an API so that we could use it to access this information from the kiosk. We also knew MAG might want to add other channels, like mobile phones, et cetera. So we built it as an API to make it easily accessible. We also knew we needed chat history so that people could ask follow-up questions. If I asked that question about the destination of my flight, I might want to know, what's the status? I don't want to have to tell it again which flight I'm on. As far as the business logic, we knew we needed those 3 tools, the content from MAG website, flight data, and weather, and then we needed to create that LLM agent to decide which tools to use. We also had to keep in mind some requirements as we built all of this technology. The first of which is that we wanted to build all of our infrastructure using AWS CDK. Now, one of the benefits of this is that MAG had never used CDK before. So it was another piece of new technology that they got to get hands-on experience with and experiment with. And it was a pretty successful experiment because they're continuing to roll out CDK in other applications as well. MAG also has built a lot of their infrastructure using serverless technologies, and so we wanted to mirror their current environment. So we also built the infrastructure using serverless technologies. We knew that, especially for Stansted, we wanted to support multiple languages, which really influenced which LLMs we experimented with during the prototype. We also wanted the system to be able to request more information if needed. If I ask, what's the destination of my flight, the system should probably ask me what flight I'm on. We also wanted the system to use boarding pass details where given, which influenced some of the architectural decisions we made when customers scanned their boarding passes. And lastly, we knew we needed to implement Amazon Bedrock guardrails in order to make sure that the system stayed on topic. So then we were done with the planning phase, we were ready to start building, and I'm going to tell you about the people, process, and technology that made the build phase possible. As far as the people, we spent about 400 person hours doing this experimentation and experience. That consisted of 1 junior and 1 senior engineer from MAG, as well as myself. As far as the process, we had 4 one-week sprints. Now, we did one-week sprints because we wanted to get really good feedback early and often. If we were heading in the wrong direction week 1, and we found that out at the end of week 1, that was a lot better than finding out at the end of week 4 when the prototype was done. So that was really instrumental for us to get that feedback from a lot of our key stakeholders. As far as the technology, you saw a lot of the AWS services used. We had Amazon Cognito, AWS WAF, Amazon API Gateway for the UI and authentication. This is just a subset to remind you all, as well as AWS Lambda, Amazon DynamoDB, Amazon Bedrock, and Amazon Candra for the application and databases. We also used LangChain, which is an open source framework for orchestrating with LLMs, and we used Anthropic's Claude V1 instant for the prototype. You can probably imagine when we built this prototype, Claude V3 didn't exist yet. This was back in Q1 of this year. So at the end of the build phase, the MAG team decided to continue building the prototype and brought it forward. And so I want you to meet Val. If any of you remember my name, you might remember that I'm also Val. We've started calling me Human Val to avoid confusion. So if you would like to refer to me that, you can. It does get really funny when we're having conversations with the MAG team because no one ever knows who they're talking about. I'm actually here to introduce you to the virtual airport liaison, also called Val. It was in fact named after me, which was a really exciting moment for me. They made sure I was on video when they told me so they could all see my face, which was a lot of fun. I'm going to show you a quick video of MAG in action, narrated by Alex Whitehorn, the senior engineer from MAG that I worked with on the prototype. Now, Alex is based in Manchester, so the video you're going to see is actually from the Manchester airport. So if you hear references to Manchester instead of Stansted, which is in London, that's why. Can we turn the sound up on the video?
Let's imagine that we're a customer in the airport in front of one of our information kiosks. So we might want to know details about our flight. So let's ask it to tell me about my flight. Correctly, the virtual assistant realizes it doesn't have enough information, so it prompts us for more. So let's type in our flight. We get an autocomplete there to verify that we've got the correct one. And because the system has access to content from our chat history, it can now answer the question even though we gave it just a flight ID and no other context. And here we see a nice render of what could be a boarding card. So something a bit more challenging then. A customer might want to know, where is my gate? And again, because of context and chat history, as well as agentic use of tools, the system knows where the gate is, and we can even click into this to get directions from the information kiosk to the gate.
So I want to share with you a couple lessons learned from the prototype that not only helped me, but also helped MAG and in their journey to production. The first lesson learned leans a lot on an Amazon leadership principle, bias for action. With new technologies, especially generative AI, it can be overwhelming how many decisions you have to make when you don't have a complete picture. Which LLM should you use? Which vector database should you get started with? And more. Instead of focusing on all the decisions you have to make and trying to research all the different technologies, I would encourage you all to use bias for action and just start building. It probably won't work very well. You'll probably change a lot, like the prompt and other things in the stack that you're using, but you'll start to really understand the technology better once you get hands-on actually developing with it. That was something that we learned really quickly with MAG. The second thing we learned was about experimenting with multiple languages. I was the only one on the project that spoke any other language, and I speak Spanish at about the level of like a 7-year-old on a good day. So I had to experiment with how to use these LLMs to generate responses in multiple languages, and as you can guess, it wasn't great. And so we learned a lot about what not to do, which helped MAG a lot with their decisions on how to actually handle multiple languages after the prototype. If you want to learn more about the failure and the innovation from it, there's a link to an innovation podcast at the end of the slides. Definitely listen to that. And if you want to hear more about how MAG designed their architecture, there's a link to the This Is My Architecture video that Alex, who just narrated the other video, did as well. We also learned a lot about prompt engineering best practices, how to get large language models to actually do what you want them to do. This was really helpful for MAG, not just for the prototype, but also for future Gen AI projects, because those lessons learned about how to prompt models are applicable in various areas. Lastly, we developed a structured Gen AI testing methodology, which allowed MAG to test new models as they become available. And at this conference, I'm sure we're all well aware that they're becoming available quite often. So that allowed MAG to really quickly see if it was worth spending time experimenting with new models that came out. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan, who's going to talk a little bit more about taking the prototype to production.
Thanks, Human Val. So my challenge to my team in partnership with the prototyping team was how quickly can we get this thing off the ground? And the process that Val's just described really took from kind of planning through to execution about 8 weeks in total. So I guess that's just a testament to how quickly you can move on these things. And actually for MAG, it was a first to work in this way. So even the concept of moving through a prototype process was in a way an innovation prototype for us in terms of a way of working. So what we've now got is a working prototype. We're confident that the technology can meet the customer demand and the business question. We're confident that the architecture is scalable in the way that Val's just talked about. But what we now need to do is move from a prototype to something we're happy to put in front of our customers. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we faced on the road to doing that and how we overcame those. It's no secret that lots of organizations have had challenges with hallucinations on generative AI, chatbot kind of customer channels. There are many well-documented, fairly public challenges, parcel delivery firm based in the UK whose chatbot went rogue when encouraged by one of its customers to be rather derogatory about the parcel delivery service that company provided. Closer to home here in North America, an airline whose chatbot was giving out incorrect information to passengers who were asking questions about ticket types and ticket prices, causing them to book the wrong thing and ultimately be disappointed. So the real world risks of this innovative technology in terms of customer perception, customer experience, and ultimately our business reputation, are fairly significant. And these are some of the examples as we moved from prototyping through to a wider kind of scale of both technical and business testing that we actually started to see. And I'll just pick a couple out, just kind of out of interest. I think they demonstrate some quite interesting underlying points. So, there was a really interesting one around. We asked the tool, do I need to wear a mask at the airport? So a hark back to the kind of COVID-19 pandemic. And the answer that came back from the tool was a very firm yes. Yes, you do. The reason for that is buried somewhere in one of our hundreds of website pages. We had a page we hadn't taken down that gave guidance on COVID-19 protocols. You can imagine from a customer and even a PR perspective, certain quarters of our UK press would have been really, really happy to have reported that our airports wanted people to wear masks again in the winter of 2024, however untrue that would be. And so it was pretty important that we kind of adopted a kind of a chaos testing approach where we got our various team members to ask the tool lots of seemingly random things, and through that we unearthed some things. And so the underlying point here, of course, is the tool is only as good as the underlying data you're pointing it at. And in this case, our website data was wrong. Double benefit, our website's now correct, so hopefully that doesn't show any information on there that it shouldn't do. The other one worth highlighting is the overconfidence. So in the early days, we had the tool configured to always give an answer. We said, we'd always like you to answer the customer's question. But what that did as a kind of a general rule of logic, it meant that ultimately the LLM always gave an answer, even if it didn't know the answer. So, what time is my flight? You saw in the demo where we got it to with then the next level of prompts to clarify what flight that somebody meant. But actually in the early days, actually what it said was, it just gave you an answer, which clearly would have a potential real-world implication if we had a customer who thought that the technology was so good that it had actually read their mind as to what flight they were on and was directing them to clearly the wrong place. So, it's useful just to kind of reflect on some of the things that we then had to go back and do. So what we now had at the end of kind of that process was a product that we felt from a technology perspective was ready to go. But we'd missed one kind of really key point, which was that, of course, the cliche is true, with technology projects, technology is only half the problem. What we'd failed to do at the point where we were ready to go live was actually engage broadly across our senior stakeholder base. So the folks who were running our airports, our execs, had all seen the power of what this could do and were all really excited by it, but they also saw some of the headlines from other companies who'd tried and made mistakes quite publicly. And they didn't want the tool hallucinating for our customers and that, again, generating the wrong kind of headlines. And so even though we thought we were ready to go, actually what we'd neglected to do was take our business colleagues on the journey with us that said, here's all of the kind of off-script testing we've done. Here's how the thing actually works. Here's what data it's trained on. Here are the guardrails that Val talked about earlier that programmatically mean that this thing can't go and give you an answer that it would be nefarious and would be outside of the context of our airport business. My favorite example of that, actually, my boss, the CIO, managed in the early days to actually get the tool to, he asked it to write him a poem about the queues at the airport, which I have to say, the tool did a really good job of writing a great poem. I mean, it was rhyming. It even tried to upsell him a fast track pass, which was quite clever, actually, but clearly not something that we wanted the tool to do, and whilst amusing to some, again, could be interpreted in the wrong way. And so giving him confidence that we'd fixed that through the testing phase, doing the show and tells, doing the understanding, working across the various functions across the 3 airports, be it our press relations team, be it our operations teams, under kind of John's counterparts in the other airports as well, to really build that kind of confidence from an exec perspective that what we had was both technically and business ready. So I'm pleased to say that we overcame those challenges, and in the middle of November we put Val live across our 3 airports, starting with London Stansted. And we've already started to get some really interesting customer insight. So first off, their feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, actually across both our customer base and our colleagues, actually, who really value the ability to kind of point customers at it, especially for the multi-language support. So back to John's point, around 50% of our passengers at Stansted are inbound travellers to the UK, visiting London for either tourism, friends, family, work. Often English isn't their first language. Often those passengers don't actually speak English. And so having somewhere for our colleagues to take them to get questions answered has proven really popular. Customers also have fed back, they really like the integration to the digital wayfinding. So you saw in the demo the where's my gate and then the kind of bespoke kind of map that popped up. That's been a really interesting feature that they've certainly kind of fed back on. I think what's been really interesting, though, for us are the unintended benefits of the innovation program. So, we set out to serve our customers better, to do that in a more digital way, to do that in a way that was more scalable 24/7, 365 days a year in multi-languages. We've done those things. But what we also discovered was what customers were actually asking us drove really interesting insights. I'll give you 2 examples. So at one particular kiosk, and we deploy this in a way that we know what kiosk and where that's located, one particular kiosk in Stansted, the overwhelming question asked was, where are the toilets? Which seemed a little odd because it was just out of kilter with all the other kiosks where you got that question but not that regularly. And what the team discovered as they went to look at that kiosk was that there was no physical signage in eyesight around that kiosk. So that was a very small example, but one that we're now able to act on to just generally improve the customer experience, because who wants to spend 2 minutes asking the kiosk where the toilet is when you just want to know, right? Back to Val's point about being in a rush. What's really interesting, though, certainly from a kind of a passenger experience and commercial standpoint, is in our arrivals hall at Stansted, the overwhelming question being asked at those kiosks is, how do I get to London? What's the fastest route to London? What's the cheapest route to London? And that presents us a real opportunity, A, to intercept that customer and direct them into a commercial route where actually we can be party to selling them that onward travel ticket. So that's a commercial opportunity for us to double down on a route that we've already got, albeit in a very physical space at the moment. But it's also a real opportunity to start to get to know that passenger. You know, if that's a passenger who's arriving in London as a visitor, they're probably going to be returning through our airport as a departing passenger in the coming days or weeks, and they're probably part of that population that John referenced that we don't know. They don't interact with us. So we do see it as a real opportunity to start to interact with passengers in a way that kind of says, here's the best way to get to London. We can sell you the ticket now digitally. Would you let us know when you're coming back? We can sell you the return ticket, so that's ready for your return journey. And also, what day are you coming? And we can start to talk to them about the various options for them to enjoy in the airport from a food and beverage perspective, and we can plan our operation better as well. So I guess the point here being the unintended benefits are almost as great as the intended ones, and that's been quite a journey for us to kind of realize as we go through this. So we've talked about the kind of the technical and business side of moving through to production. We've talked about the customer perceptions. Worth spending a few minutes just on the numbers, and I think I'm not going to spend a long time on this slide, but I think that the points that you'd see are, and we've talked a lot about this, I think it's been a topic of conversation more generally, you know, we see this tool as hugely complementary to our workforce. So this isn't about replacing people. This is about complementing those people so that those humans can do the really complex stuff, you know, the moments that matter for customers with more complex queries, perhaps with a large family, etc., that they need kind of bespoke human-to-human attention. And we want to free them up so that actually we can use Val to answer the more kind of regular and you might say mundane questions. The other thing, of course, with Val is it is available 24/7, 365. And that means as we scale to the 43 million passengers that John talked about earlier, we're going to be able to do that in a way that doesn't mean we have to scale the staff to a certain level. And clearly, we won't be able to scale staff who can speak 40 languages. And so I think, and we can do all of that, you know, roughly for the cost of kind of one member of staff. We buy ourselves the power to answer 28,000 questions a day. And that's a really interesting stat just to reflect on. And so the kind of the business case for this is clearer now than I think it's ever been in that sense. And so, you know, the question being at that point, so has Val already made an impact? So here we are 3 weeks in since launching. During that time, 4,000 passengers have interacted with the digital ecosystem, and they've asked 1,000 questions. So I think it's fair to say that Val is absolutely starting to make an impact. And so at that point, my question to John was, have we solved your business problem?
I'd say yes, and I think there's more we can do. And I think seeing what's been achieved in such a short period of time is like really exciting, really impressive. But now I'm thinking about how do we engage with more of those inbound passengers? How can we make Val more accessible through personal devices, through voice to text? So from my perspective, Val's delivered what we set out to achieve, but it's revealed so many more opportunities for us. Yeah.
And I think that kind of completes the virtuous circle that started with a customer problem, has, you know, gone a long way to starting to solve that customer problem, but now throws up a whole host of further opportunities by continuing to focus on the customer. So we've already started to task the team on how do we accelerate the roadmap towards a mobile release so that you can take this ecosystem with you in your hand, and that's both, through the terminal itself, but also starting to make it accessible before your journey and after your journey, which is a really important play for us alongside the Cavu business that John referenced earlier, which is Manchester Airports Group digital distribution business. And that's about actually how do we leverage a digital marketplace of broader travel services that places the airport at the heart of your journey. And so we see this as a really strategic tool whereby our airport customers can start to interact with us in a mobile way. Val becomes a really important hook in for them, because clearly, again, you've all traveled, you've all probably had questions before you get to the airport. Which terminal am I going to go to? And what am I going to see when I get there? What should I expect at security? So opening this up to a mobile channel where you can ask those questions ahead of time, during your journey, and then afterwards presents a whole host of new opportunities that allows us to further personalize and actually start to get into what we'd like to think about as a logged-in state, so a My Stansted and My Manchester account-based capability, which then ultimately means that we can start to do some of the really interesting stuff in the long run around in-app purchases, etc. So the possibilities are significant. I think that before I just hand back to Mike to close us out, I'd reflect on a couple of things. This journey has been a real collaboration between our business colleagues who've been focused on what problems we're trying to solve for our customers and our operations colleagues, our technology teams through a design process and an engineering process, and the AWS team who've been a great partner in helping us to experiment, to move quickly, to learn along the way. And I think my reflection on that is, look at the outcomes we're now creating for customers, but look at the possibilities it's creating for our business. And we're still right at the early stages of that, I think, in terms of unlocking that potential. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Mike to close us out.
John, Human Val, Ryan, thank you so much for sharing the story with us. And I think you'll all agree, a really compelling use case of starting with a customer problem, experimenting and building a great technology solution, and then delivering real value into the organization. Okay, so let's wrap this up. What main takeaways can we bring from this story? The first one, and we've repeated this over and over again, is to really focus on the customer and take time to understand their problem. You know what it's like. We love jumping to solutions. We all love solving problems, but taking extra time to fall in love with that customer problem and understand it deeply will set you in the right direction before you start to develop solutions and go into all the fun prototyping. Secondly, a word of warning. This is not always just about technology. While there are lots of new tools available for us, it's always worth pausing to think about the human element as well. How are you going to use these new tools and services to enhance the capabilities that your teams already have? This isn't about building technology to replace people, as Ryan said. And then finally, some of those amazing, unexpected wins. So one of the things we talk about at Amazon when we build new products and services is launch day is just the start. For other organizations, often when they launch a product or service, that's the end. They launch the product, high fives all round, and they don't move on. What's really exciting about the engagement with MAG is they've adopted an iterative approach. So when they launched the product, they then started to look at the data and uncover what could go next. And I think that's incredibly exciting, going on that journey of discovery as you build new solutions. So let's recap. At the start of the presentation, I talked about some of those key challenges for innovation and what our most successful customers do when they go on an innovation journey. So let's see how the MAG team did. First of all, selecting stakeholders. Well, we had the operations executive as well as the technology executive as part of the team, which meant those cross-functional engagements worked really well. Secondly, as you saw, they really thought about providing a service for customers. And they started with a problem rather than thinking about building a chatbot from the get-go. And as they went through the experimentation process, the solution changed a lot along the way. And finally, as you saw from the slide Ryan shared with the numbers, they had a really clear understanding of the business value that they would deliver to the organization. So this meant launching the solution and actually taking it from that prototype into production stage was much easier. I think that's a 3 out of 3. Good job. Okay, so we've had 45 minutes here to explain how the solution works, but it's a bit more complex than that. So if you want to understand more about this project, as Human Val said earlier, there's a few resources we'd like to share with you. So there's some QR codes on the screen now that will take you to the Innovation Ambassadors podcast, where the team talk about how they addressed the customer challenge at the start. And the second link is to This Is My Architecture video that goes into a bit more detail about the AWS architecture, how it was built and how it was developed, and being shared by the MAG team. So I know a few of you have been clicking on those links. If you haven't managed to find them, if you search for Manchester Airports Group and AWS, they're in the top 5 results. So they're very easy to find online if you want to explore a little bit more about the detail here. I'd just like to thank again John and Ryan from MAG for coming here today, and also Human Val for providing insight into the AWS architecture. I'm Mike Bainbridge. Thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your reInvent.